Hi everyone, Dr. Lindner. In this short video, what I want to introduce to you are the four different types of tissues, right? Because after cells come tissues. Now, the four different types of tissues are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, and muscle tissue. What we're going to cover today are a few categories under connective tissue and muscle tissue. And then next week, when we return, we'll cover all of these again, focusing on epithelium and a few of the other components of connective tissue microscopically. Nervous tissue is very quick. Muscle tissue is very quick. We'll cover that today. So let me just explain quickly the big difference between epithelial tissue and connective tissue, what those big differences are. Let me just move this out of the way. So under a microscope, what happens, let's see if I can open this up a little bit. Give me 1 second. Give me a moment. Let me close that out. Let's try that again. Okay. So let me open up my pen here. The big differences between epithelial tissue and connective tissue under a microscope. When we're looking at epithelial tissue is made up of a bunch of cells that are closely packed together like this, right? There's very little space. There's a nucleus in each of these, right? Whether they're round, whether the cells are tall like this, doesn't make a difference. The key is that they're closely packed together, or whether they're irregular shaped and round like this. Okay, so under a microscope, we have a bunch of cells that look like little squares, but they're closely packed together. Here they look like tall columns and they're closely packed together. And here they're flat, irregular shape, they're closely packed together. So whenever you have cells that are closely packed together with very little space, that's epithelial tissue. Connective tissue is when we have a cell here, another cell here, another cell here, and there's lots of extracellular proteins and substances between them. That's connective tissue. So when the cells are closely packed together under a microscope, we're going to classify it as epithelium. And when it is made up of cells that are further apart like these, that's connective tissue. That's a big difference. Okay, that'll make the next week's lecture a little bit easier, right? Like in all of these, we see cells closely packed together. That's epithelium. Now, we're going to be covering different types of connective tissue, and we're going to focus on blood, so we understand what different blood cells look like. And then we're going to focus on bone, the bone cell. So you're going to hear some of these terms like osteon and osteoblast and osteocyte and osteoclast. We'll talk about concentric lamellae, circumferential lamellae, interstitial lamellae, caniculi, Volkmann's canal. All of these checked off terms lacunae, periosteum, endosteum, central canal. I'm going to show you all of these on the bone histology and bone slide. So if this is a bone right up here, the outside portion of the bone, like right there, and then this portion here, right? If we take that, any section of that, which would be this section here to here, that's referred to as compact bone. That's compact bone. Whereas in the center of that, here, in the center here, or even the proximal portion and the distal portion, that's all considered spongy bone. Okay. Other important terms, the membrane that surrounds the bone itself, the outer portion, is called the periosteum, whereas the inner lining is the endosteum. So this portion here is the endosteum, the inner part, and then the external part is the periosteum. And it's the periosteum of the bone, which is where tendons attach and ligaments attach. The other thing that you're going to hear is this term osteon. And osteon is only found in compact bone. And the appearance of an osteon, this is just one osteon. This is another osteon. Here's another osteon. What these osteons look like would be the appearance of chopping a tree down, right? When you chop a tree down and you look inside, you have a bunch of these concentric rings, layers of these concentric rings, and those are called lamellae. See here at the bottom, lamellae. Those are the concentric rings going around. And it's important to know that the bone is vascular. There are blood vessels that we see traveling through here. And the blood vessels go through what's called a Heversion Canal or a central canal. That's where we have the arteries and the veins and lymphatics. Okay, so through the Heversion Canal are blood vessels. Around the concentric lamellae, all the way around on the most periphery, we have what's called circumferential lamellae. So we have concentric lamellae, which are the rings that make up the osteons. But then going around the periphery of that is going to be circumferential lamellae. Okay. So let me go into the bone PDF now, so I can show you some of the important structures that we just mentioned. The outer layer, I can't mark this one up with marker, so you'll have to follow along with my arrow here. So the outer layer, which is where tendons and ligaments attach, that's called the periosteum. And over here on the inside, that would be the endosteum, right here on the inside. We do have a nutrient artery that perforates right through the periosteum. And then you can see that it has many off branches at different levels and different layers, and they go through the very center of each osteon, right? They go through their Heversion Canal or the central canal. These are lamellae, but they're around the periphery. They're closer to the periosteum. That's called circumferential lamellae. Whereas each of these layers of the wedding cake, right, those are concentric lamellae. Now, these cells are called osteocytes. Now, let me go back into the PowerPoint for a second, just so I can draw something for you here. Let's say this cell right here is an osteoblast. It's an osteoblast, OB, osteoblast, okay? Now, the osteoblast, it makes matrix. It's going to produce calcium salts, and it's going to produce the cement that makes up the bone. So this osteoblast is pushing out and producing matrix or cement, but we all know what happens to cement. Cement is going to harden. And when it hardens, this osteoblast is going to get trapped in a cavity. So in the middle is an osteoblast that was producing matrix, the cement, the calcium salts that are going to make up bone, but eventually it's going to calcify and ossify and harden, and this osteoblast gets trapped in this hollowed out space. And this hollowed out space that it gets trapped in is called a lacunae. A lacunae. Okay. L-A-C-U-N-A. A lacuna or lacunae. Now, once it gets trapped, I'm going to put OB for osteoblast. The osteoblast, now that it's trapped, it's going to become an osteocyte. It's going to become an osteocyte. So it's an osteoblast first, produces the matrix, then it's going to calcify and ossify, all that matrix is going to harden, and the osteoblast gets trapped in a lacunae. Now it's not an osteoblast anymore. It's actually called an osteocyte. An osteocyte. I just call it an oocyte for abbreviation, but it's an osteocyte. And osteocytes are mature cells. The osteoblast is an immature cell that makes the matrix. The osteocyte is a mature cell. And then off of those osteocytes, you're going to see these little canals, these little spider-like, finger-like extensions that come off of that. And those are going to be called, they're certain types of canals, and they call them Canaliculi. Canaliculi. I'm going to show you these now coming up. So these little black circles, those are osteocytes. Now you have a little bit of an idea. Now, osteoblasts make the bone, they make the matrix. The osteocytes are what they're called after they get stuck in their lacunae. And you have osteoclasts that will break down bone. We're not going to see the osteoclast here, but just from a physiological standpoint, think of it this way. Osteoblasts build up bone, osteoclasts break down bone. Osteoblasts build the bone, osteoclasts break down the bone. It's this constant cycle of building up and breaking down, building up and breaking down. You're building up bone, but then you have to break it down. And after it's broken down, you got to make more. So you have this balance that's required between those two cells, the osteoblast and the osteoclast. Now here's a bird's eye view looking at bone. Again, if we were to ask what type of tissue this is bone. This falls under connective tissue. It's bone, but these concentric rings tells us we're looking at compact bone. Okay, compact bone is the only bone that has these osteons. So again, on the outside, we have the periosteum, where tendons and ligaments attach. Then we have these lamellae, but these are circumferential lamellae. Circumferential lamellae are very different than these concentric lamellae. The concentric lamellae are the layers of the cake, the different layers of the osteon itself. In the center of each osteon is the Heversion Canal or central canal. And the purpose of the Heversion Canal, that's where you have your blood vessels that travel through. Now, in between the osteons, right? So in between, let's say this osteon here and this osteon here, we see these partial concentric rings. They're not fully concentric lamellae, right? They don't make complete circles. They're partials. Because what these are remnants, like you could see them here, you could see some here. They're remnants of older osteons that were broken down. Remember, osteoblasts build up bone, and then osteoclasts break them down. So as osteoclasts are breaking down older osteons, you're left with these interstitial lamellae. So you have circumferential lamellae, concentric lamellae, and interstitial lamellae. The periosteum is the outer part of the bone. The inside, the inner part that's very, very close to spongy bone is called the endosteum. The endosteum. We have this circumferential lamellae closer to the periosteum, so that's the outer circumferential lamellae. And then all the way on the inside, near the endosteum, we have the inner circumferential lamellae. Now you see these little black dots over here at the bottom. Okay, so inside, the cell would be the osteocyte. The cavity that it's in is the lacunae. And then those little extensions, those spider-like legs coming off of it, are called Canaliculi. I'll show you the spelling of those in a second. Just wanted you to hear it for now, but I'll cover it again. A close-up view, here's the periosteum. Here's a nutrient artery that perforates through it, and that's why when bones break, bones can bleed. They do break and they bleed. Here's the outer circumferential lamellae. These cells are called osteocytes. So in a close-up view here, in the center, that's the Heversion Canal or central canal. Each of these red lines here represents one of those lamellae that go all the way around. So those are concentric lamellae. What's between the two osteons are interstitial lamellae. Those are remnants of older osteons that were broken down. The cavities where the osteocyte sits, so here's an osteocyte on the top here, but the cavity that's empty where it sits, it's called a lacunae. Okay, the cell that sits inside of that is an osteocyte. Now we're zooming in again. So now number one, the cavity is a lacunae. Number two, the lamellae between these active osteocytes are called interstitial lamellae. Number three is the Heversion Canal or central canal. And number four, these are concentric lamellae going all the way around. Number one is an osteocyte. I want to show you number four, circumferential lamellae. That's closer to the periosteum, which is out here. The radiations that come off of number one, like these spider-like extensions, those are called Canaliculi. See if we show them coming up here, a better view. Again, here's the Heversion Canal or central canal. These are osteocytes. Here we go. Here's a full osteon, just a different color. so we can see the different structures. And I kind of like this one a whole lot better because it shows the cavity. It shows the cavity with the cell, right? So if we're pointing to these hollowed out cavities here and here, that's the lacunae. But if we're pointing to the blue structure inside of it, that's an osteocyte. If we're looking at the spider-like, jellyfish-like extensions that come off of that, those are tiny canals. Those are called Canaliculi. Those are the red lines, the Canaliculi. Each of these layers going around is a concentric lamellae. The ones between osteons are called interstitial lamellae. Kind of like the fluid between cells are called interstitial fluid. So this is the substance between osteons. It's called interstitial lamellae. So lacunae, osteocyte, canaliculi. Concentric lamellae, interstitial lamellae. Here's the artery, the vein. We have some lymphatic vessels going through the Heversion Canal. So we have artery, vein, we have nerve, there's even lymph. All of those vessels run through. This is a lymphatic vessel right here, the lymph, artery, vein, nerve. All those structures go through the central canal or Heversion Canal. Lacunae, osteocyte, canaliculi. Again, similar model, different color, but same structures. So you have the hollowed out cavities here. Those are called lacunae. What sits in that is going to be the osteocyte. And the blue structure is just the nucleus of the osteocyte. The finger-like extensions coming off of it, those spider-like finger-like extensions are called canaliculi. If you ever ask this, if it ever pops up on a test, you don't have to specify nucleus or cell body. I just want to know it's the osteocyte. It's an osteocyte.